Picture this. You step into an old antique shop, its air thick with history and relics from forgotten times. The air is still, silent. Then, suddenly, a glass cabinet shatters out of nowhere. No one touched it, and yet it explodes with such force that glass flies in all directions. The question lingers. Could it be mere coincidence? Or is there something more chilling lurking in this seemingly quiet shop? This is the story of a shop in Barnsley, UK, where the ordinary world blends with the unexplained. It all began quietly for Daniel, an antique dealer in Barnsley, who was used to the ordinary business of dealing in old objects. The idea of anything supernatural was far from his mind when he installed CCTV cameras to keep an eye on his shop. What he didn't expect was that these cameras would capture more than just customers browsing. In fact, strange happenings began almost immediately, long before the shop ever opened its doors to the public. At first, Daniel tried to dismiss it all as random incidents. After all, who believes in ghosts in the 21st century? But as the months went on, the oddities piled up, each one more puzzling than the last. One of the first bizarre occurrences was an incident that took even Daniel by surprise. A cabinet, seemingly untouched, suddenly shattered, glass flying across the room. The CCTV footage showed the cabinet door already open, and then, without warning, it exploded into 1,000 pieces. When the footage was later reviewed, even experts were left scratching their heads. It would take an enormous amount of kinetic energy to cause such an event, one expert remarked. But there was no clear cause, no temperature shifts, no structural damage, nothing that could explain why the glass had shattered so violently. Could it have been a crack in the glass? It seemed unlikely. Could there have been some force they weren't seeing? The possibility of paranormal activity was raised, though it was far from a conclusion. But as days turned into weeks, these strange occurrences refused to stop. Daniel and his team found themselves increasingly at the center of a series of inexplicable events. Objects began moving on their own, sometimes falling from shelves or even flying across the room. Doors opened and closed when no one was around. Another antique dealer, Andy, who worked from the same shop, couldn't ignore what was happening. Though he had long considered himself a skeptic, something about these incidents was hard to deny. Mirrors, paintings, they seemed to detach from the walls without cause, and no amount of reasoning could explain it. Yet despite the unease, neither Daniel nor Andy felt any real fear, though they couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. There were times, they said, when a cold chill would fill the room, and the hairs on their arms would rise as if an unseen presence had passed by. It wasn't just the shop's owners and workers who were encountering the strange. Customers, too, began reporting their own unnerving experiences. One day, a man visited the shop with his young son, who had been captivated by a large painting of a skull. The boy stood staring at the artwork, mesmerized by its dark imagery, when, without warning, the painting began to move. It slid from its position and fell, landing directly at the boy's feet. The father, stunned, looked around for an explanation, but found none. There was no wind, no one nearby who could have disturbed the painting. When Daniel later checked the CCTV footage, he saw the painting move on its own, with no visible force acting upon it. In other instances, small objects would be found on the floor in the mornings, often in positions that defied explanation. And time and again, the CCTV footage captured these unexplained movements, objects sliding across surfaces or toppling to the ground in a way that left even the most skeptical minds searching for answers. As the strange events continued, Daniel began to entertain a thought that he had once laughed off. Could his shop be haunted? Was there something beyond the physical world at play here? It seemed far-fetched, and yet, the number of unexplained events was growing hard to ignore. If these weren't the actions of poltergeists, noisy ghosts known for moving objects, then what could possibly explain it? Experts in the paranormal, too, were intrigued, though many were hesitant to jump to conclusions. After all, there is a fine line between the unexplained and the supernatural. One expert pointed out that people often interpret strange events based on their beliefs. If one is inclined to believe in ghosts, even the smallest unexplained movement might be taken as proof. But the question remained, could there be something more here? In an effort to find answers, Daniel invited paranormal investigator Jane Harris to the shop. Armed with modern equipment and a deep understanding of the paranormal, Jane set out to see if she could capture more evidence. The world of the paranormal, she noted, has always been controversial. While people once relied on spirit boards and seances to communicate with the other side, modern science has shifted the way we view these phenomena. What might have been accepted as evidence in the past is now scrutinized with a more skeptical eye. And yet, as Jane explored the shop, she couldn't help but feel that there were things happening here that defied easy explanation. Perhaps, she mused, there are things we're not meant to understand, things that remain unexplained because they exist just beyond the reach of human comprehension. To this day, the antique shop in Barnsley continues to defy explanation. Objects move, strange chills fill the air, and CCTV cameras capture events that seem to have no logical cause. Is this just a case of faulty fixtures and coincidence? Or is there something more, something that lurks just out of sight, waiting to reveal itself? Some mysteries are never meant to be solved, but one thing is certain. The story of this haunted shop is far from over.